Welcome, everybody. My name is Claire Adida, and I am professor of political science at UC San Diego and director of UCSD's Center for Comparative Immigration Studies. And today we're thrilled to co-sponsor with the UCLA Center for the Study of International Migration a conversation about Turkish migration at the southern border. Our panelists are Professor Chiara Maritato, an assistant professor of political science at the University of Turin, who, as a visiting scholar at CCIS, spent time interviewing Turkish migrants in open-air detention sites down at the southern border. Along with Professor Maritato, she is joined by Erika Pinheiro, who is the litigation and policy director of Otro Lado, and Nicoló Filippo Rosso, a documentary photographer living between South Central and North America and documenting migrations in the region. We're thrilled to hear more about the migration connections between Turkey, Mexico, and the United States in today's talk. We do not have a discussant today. We're going to let our panelists speak for about 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. So when it's time to open it up, feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat function, or simply raise your hand and I will call on you so that you can ask your question live. But in the meantime, please make sure you are muted, and I will turn it over to Professor Maritato. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Claire, for this introduction. I'm really grateful, and really thank you to all of you today for joining online. This is an in theory project, so any comments, suggestions are really more than welcome. So thank you in advance for that. I will now share the screen. So let's see, PowerPoint works or not. And of course, presentation mode is on. Yeah, hopefully. Can you see the screen? All right, lovely. Okay, so this research project is part of, let's see also if I can move on. It's always the first slide that is, I'm still on the first one, so let's see if okay, now it should be okay. Yeah, so this is research project is part of a larger project. It's an European Commission Marie Curie project funded at this title. It's a broad project. It's from transit to stranded migrants being on standby at the EU and US border. Precisely, the intent is to examine how migrants' immobility and forced mobility between pushbacks. We will come back on this for sure, but let me just introduce a few words and few concepts related to so-called irregular border crossing is governed. And actually, it will involve, and it will include fieldwork at the border between Turkey and Greece, which is also a border between Turkey and the European Union or the European space, Schengen space, which is a land border, precisely, I mean, the so-called southeastern Mediterranean border. When migrants try to cross a river, the Meric River or the Evros from the Greek part, to enter precisely European Union. But it's in that area where most of pushbacks are today's actually in place, pushback from Greece particularly in place. So this as a background, that means that the project will continue also on that border after what I'm going to present today. So when I arrived in San Diego and I started organizing the part of the fieldwork, the US-Mexican border, the idea was to, of course, start to find out some actors involved in receiving migrants that had just crossed into the US. And a few weeks or days, actually, after my arrival, I saw a call for volunteer by an organization, Otro Lado, who was asking for volunteer to provide aids or food, clothes for migrants who just entered and crossed the border. And they were staying in the open air detention sites in the desert area of Jacumba and Boulevard, just waiting, but we will talk more about that later, but waiting that their case is being processed by the Custom and Border Patrol. So I actually get in touch with Otro Lado, who actually welcomed me to volunteer in that area. And since the first day, it was a weekend, I arrived there, I ended up seeing a lot of migrants from Turkey that were actually just arrived, just entered in the US. Let's say that actually, of course, to start this presentation, that nationwide Turkish migrants entering, if we consider like the total of the population which enter let's say in the US, constitute about 0.5, 0.7 of the total encounters, as they call it, by the CBP. So what is important to stress, it's actually the total number of migrants that we see that have been encountered again in the San Diego sectors. That could give some ideas of what we were also encountering, what we were seeing in this open air detention sites. And this, if we see the data on the 2022 and 2023, for instance, it's possible to see how the number of Turkish migrants entering through that are in that area actually has increased. But again, we can come back later on this. On this, let's say, seeing this number of migrants from Turkey, I start asking, first of all, of course, why and how migrants from Turkey are coming to the US. And the second related question was why they are not going in Europe. I mean, why they are not migrating and they are to Europe and are choosing the US. That was kind of related question. And at the same time, I wanted to see what this immigration wave that I was seeing day by day somehow could reveal about Turkish politics, I mean, the situation in Turkey, and also while asking why they were not going to Europe, why they decided to migrate to the United States, what this could reveal also about the two different way of managing migration, and that what this could actually inform us about different way of migration management. And it's also important as a background to say that although I met hundreds of migrants, I could actually so far collect information interviewing a total of 15 migrants, and plus, let's say, a total of 12 in-depth interviews, which were recorded and kind of more in-depth with migrants from Turkey. Again, talking about this migration, is important to refer to the literature that already has explored Turkish and migration from Turkey into the United States. Here I try to skip, and but we can, of course, be back to that also in the Q&A. Just mentioning that the literature is quite, agreed and find common steps in defining three main waves of migration. The first one, situating the first one in the during the Ottoman Empire, and precisely just before also the establishment of the Turkish Republic in 1923. And that was a labor migration, unskilled migrants coming to the United States, but also this is important because the literature observes that then, with the foundation of Turkish Republic, most of these migrants actually went back, and there was a kind of stop in for a few years of this migration, which actually revamped it then in this second wave between the 1950s and 1980s. Again, the 1980s is an important moment and actually is related to the 1980s military coup in Turkey, when a third wave then actually started, and is a more diverse, heterogeneous wave of migration, which also included political oppositions members, but also both religious and secular professionals that actually decided to migrate to the US, to the United States. And again, this migrations and this wave of migrations are, as I said, well situated in the literature, but at the same time, the literature is also debating a lot in this time whether we can talk about or not of a third wave actually in the post-2010. Why 2010? Because actually in the very early 2000s, there was a kind of stasis due to economic growth. Turkey was considered a kind of model, a model for economic growth, but also in political terms, let's say. And that's why there is this debate whether or not we can now also talk about a third wave of migration, both in Europe and in the United States. Again, how can we also measure somehow this new wave, considering the populations? I mean, the census in 2022. Is it possible also to see and consider the people born outside the United States in the Turkish population, when and how actually migrated into the US? And we can see also some data that speaks to a kind of increased number of people arriving actually after 2010. But again, we will, and we can also go more in detail later on. Let's now talk about this migration that was actually the one that we encountered at the border. And first of all, what kind of trajectories were migrants following? First of all, it's important again to say that Turkish migrants can travel to Mexico with visa-free, and that means that they can arrive in Mexico as tourists. And especially after 2019, when the Turkish Airlines launched a direct flight from Istanbul to Mexico City and Cancun, that is of course even more directly possible. But at the same time, this trajectory was then also was just the beginning, of course, because then after, from Mexico City or Cancun, they generally take some domestic flight in Mexico to Monterrey and Tijuana. Up until there, and let's say from Istanbul to Cancun and let's say Tijuana to enter San Diego, the migrants were mentioning that the entire migration and the entire travel actually was already planned and prepared in Turkey. And what they call the all-inclusive package was actually directly decided and defined already in Turkey. Moving on, more in details, who is gonna come? So let's see what kind of what composition actually we can see of this migration. And let's say that there is quite an heterogeneous. It's quite heterogeneous in terms of age. The majority actually is under 30 years old. there is also a component of actually very early, between 18 years old to early 20s. And also we see a majority of them as single men, or actually some either married, whose family is still in Turkey, and or young men who came as alone actually in the US. And I would also add that even if fewer in number, women are also traveling alone. Again, they might travel alone because the husband is already in the United States, so they are kind of joined. The family is reuniting, but also they travel alone and they with no contacts or no network in the United States. Few information also concerning ethnics, which because this was most of the time described as a Kurdish route. So Turkish and Kurdish migrants are walking together, and I mean the same path, and they are also grouped together by when they enter and when they cross from Tijuana. So it's important also to see how they were describing their experience of precariousness in the open-aid detention sites together, and how they also were sharing, I mean, of course, that moment of precarity, and as we will see, we will talk more about that later in the Jacumba and Boulevard. Few words also concerning what I call self-perceptions, and the idea that Turkish migrants were often defining themselves as migrants, but at the same time were also somehow wanted to differentiate themselves from the condition of migrants in Turkey. So we know that Turkey is hosting about 4 million Syrian refugees at the moment. And for many of these migrants, the idea of being a migrant was pretty much connected to their experience of what migrants represent in their country, so in Turkey. And this was a kind of clash for them when they themselves then became migrants and are actually had this perception of being now migrant, and also actually entering in an irregular way in the United States. So there was this perceptions of what they did and how they were now considered in the United States. That was pretty much there in conversation, and we had in Jacumba. Of course, motivation. I would try to again briefly and summarize some of them, and stating that first of all, there is economic and financial crisis that is affecting, is suffering Turkey since 2018. And this economic crisis was pretty much there again in conversation, particularly concerning job opportunities, but also low pay job that they were actually they had in Turkey, and but it was not enough to for them to pay a rent or make a living. So that was one of the main reasons that were they were referring to. But together with that, there was also a political reason. So actually, it was possible to see migrants, many migrants that were actually defined themselves as members of political parties or political or religious organizations, like Gulen movement, for instance, or some precise political parties that have been affected by the erosion of democratic institutions that since 2010 is also ongoing in Turkey. And actually authoritarian turn the country is experiencing was pretty much also reflected in conversation, somehow presenting together this economic and political motivations. And but together with that, there was also this idea of a new beginning. So especially, as I said, it is a very young population who was experiencing this idea of a new start, and new opportunities that could be offered. And there was a sense of happiness, but also of positivity, that somehow everything would be fine, and they would find their way and a new life, let's say, in the United States. And another motivation was also connected to the upcoming election in the United States. So this was considered by many of them as the good moment, I mean, the precise moment to decide to come to the United States, just in order to avoid the potential re-election of Trump. So this was also, again, something that was recurrent in conversation. And then, as I said, then another part of the questions was why the United States and not Europe, sorry. And there are many different explanations, of course, but I would try to summarize again for time concern, and saying that, first of all, they consider Europe as already saturated with migrants, so there is too much competitions and less job offers, for instance. But at the same time, European economy was also defined as deeply in crisis. So again, they were also referring to their families and relatives in Germany, in France, in Belgium, saying that they were also suffering for economic crisis. So they know very well that it would be difficult for them to find jobs there. And third, I would say that they were coming and entering Europe with, especially with no jobs before and having no working visa, much difficult and more dangerous than, let's say, more dangerous than entering and coming to the US. This was also something that I could experience in many conversations, this idea that actually Europe was not also accepting asylum applications from Turkish migrants. And actually, if we see the data on the European Agency for Asylum data, we say that from 2019 to the first half of 2023, there was actually decline in the European asylum recognition rate, of course, concerning Turkish applications, from 54% in 2019 to 28% in the first half of 2023. That is the last data I could find. So there was this idea that there was a kind of limits in their application, different from what actually is perceived in the US. And they were, almost all of them, they wanted to apply for asylum then in the United States. Just to conclude this part, and I would say that, as I say, this project is still going on, so there is no kind of conclusions, but there are some preliminary remarks and some data that also I would like to reflect with you in the Q&A as well. And first of all, this idea of a new wave, which of course there are some elements that somehow are pretty much linked to what scholars that are reflecting on these new waves are also have already somehow singled out. And so there is a kind of confirmation of some elements, especially the heterogeneous composition of these waves, the fact that there are oppositions, people from opposition, political opposition, civic oppositions, and also, but also some educated people that are now, I mean, part of this new so-called new wave. Again, this idea that this decision occur in a kind of precise moment, like a political, of course, moment related also to the presidential elections in the United States, and the transformation of the border. This we will talk more later on about that, but I would like to already open up or introduce this as well, and as well the idea of politics of immobility. So the mobility and immobility that is possible to be experienced at the border, especially just when the crossing is either about to be actually in place or immediately after the crossing. So this is actually what could be visible and experienced. I mean, what we experienced at the border. So I think that could also be a matter of reflection and to further conceptualize it in the second part, actually, of the project as well. So I will now leave the floor to Erika, and I also try to interrupt here, sharing.
Right. All right. Thank you for that presentation, and thank you so much for inviting me today. Again, my name is Erika Pinheiro. I'm one of the directors of Otro Lado. We are a binational nonprofit providing legal and humanitarian services on both sides of the US-Mexico border. So for the past 7 years or so, I've been working mostly in Tijuana, but now more in San Diego over the past 6 months or so. So I wanted to talk about what the asylum system is supposed to look like at the border, what it's looking like right now, and touching on the open air detention sites in particular, some of the challenges and opportunities that we've had working as a collective to respond to the challenges we're seeing right now. And then just talk a little bit about like how the media and some of the political challenges are also affecting our ability to advocate for the rights of asylum seekers. So just to give a kind of broad overview of how access to asylum is supposed to work at the US border, US law says that individuals can ask for asylum and can access the US asylum system, whether they present themselves at a port of entry or between ports of entry. However, since 2016, the system has not looked like that because the US government has engaged in a variety of policies and practices that have resulted in pushbacks of asylum seekers from ports of entry, which is very similar to what we're seeing in Europe as well. So the Obama administration did it first when a large group of Haitians came to the border in 2016. Then the Trump administration started a policy called metering, where they forced people, asylum seekers who were approaching the port of entry, to put themselves on waiting lists and only processed anywhere from 0 to like 40 people a day. Then we had migrant protection protocols where migrants were forced to wait in Mexico for US asylum hearings. And then Title 42, which was a Trump era policy that basically closed the border to asylum seekers. But with each of these policies, what we saw was basically as asylum seekers were pushed away from ports of entry, and like the entry between the ports shot up. So people who are entering illegally, right? And you hear a lot of this rhetoric in the media right now about, you know, how people are breaking the law and how they're invading and, you know, just migrants having all of these nefarious motivations for crossing between ports of entry. But the reality is that they cannot present themselves at a port of entry to seek asylum. And now the only exception to that rule is the CBP-1 app. So it's a mobile application where asylum seekers can schedule an appointment to present themselves at the port. I will say it's not available in Turkish. It is only available in a limited number of languages. So even if, you know, the Turkish migrants who we're focused on today wanted to make those appointments, unless they speak English, Spanish, Haitian Creole, I think it's now also in Russian and Portuguese, they really wouldn't be able to navigate the app. And even those who can navigate the app are waiting now an average of 6 months in Mexico to get an appointment. And the majority of people that we talk to on the Mexican side of the border have either been victimized by criminal groups or been extorted by Mexican officials while they're waiting in Mexico. So it's not necessarily a safe place for folks to wait. After my presentation, I'll put a link in the chat of the most recent litigation our organization has done to challenge these pushback policies at U.S. ports of entry. But as I'll talk about in a few minutes, there are some real limitations to our ability to challenge these violations of the law on the part of DHS. So basically, as the overall number of migrants has increased at the border, and as the ports of entry have been closed off for now many years, we are seeing more people crossing between ports of entry. And in late 2022, we started to see Border Patrol holding people for days at a time, basically right near the border. We first observed it, our partners at American Friends Service Committee observed this happening between the border walls. So there's basically like 2 border walls between San Diego and Tijuana, and Border Patrol would just hold people between the 2 border walls for days at a time without providing food, water, shelter, medical care. We really started to see this happen on a larger scale in May of 2023. This was the end of Title 42. The media and DHS were expecting a huge influx of migrants. That actually never happened. There was not a huge influx of migrants when Title 42 ended. But what did happen is Border Patrol kind of created this chaos image by holding people between the border walls and then also out in Jacumba in 3 open air detention sites. So at that point, we were seeing migrants held for up to 10 days, again, without Border Patrol providing food, water, medical care, shelter. I know some groups filed a civil rights complaint at that time, and the camps lasted for about 3 weeks before they were shut down. And we saw these camps again proliferate this fall. And that's where we really started to see the number of Turkish migrants increase, right? So that's, I started spending a lot of time in Jacumba, and I would say the 2 biggest groups of extra-continental migrants were Chinese and Turkish, right? We would see them every single day. So because we were really afraid that people would die in these open air detention sites, my organization, a few other nonprofits, mutual aid groups, and individual volunteers came together to provide the basic things that people needed to survive. So again, food, water, medical attention, and shelter. We have not received funding from any government source. We have had support from philanthropy and individual donors. But as you can imagine, it's a huge lift for volunteers and really should be the job of the Department of Homeland Security, who is forcing migrants to wait in these camps. Border Patrol will bring individuals into these camps, tell them that they will be deported if they leave and that they must stay if they want to access the U.S. asylum system. So it doesn't make a lot of sense when you consider the fact that the Department of Homeland Security's budget is over $100 billion per year. It doesn't make sense that they couldn't afford to hand out some bottles of water or put up a tent, especially because FEMA is part of the Department of Homeland Security. But it's in that context really important to look at Border Patrol, and particularly the Border Patrol Union as a political organization. I would invite all of you to, like, when this presentation is over, go look at the Border Patrol Union's Twitter account, and you will see that they are right-wing, pro-Trump, kind of like a nationalist bent. They're promoting this kind of open borders hysteria. So they have political motivations to push a chaos narrative and also financial motivations. So as we saw in the last border bill that recently failed in Congress, they were set to receive an extra $20 billion. So they definitely, Border Patrol themselves has a financial incentive to make the border look more chaotic than it needs to be, right? If these migrants were being processed at ports of entry, we wouldn't have these camps. And even if we are seeing large numbers of migrants cross between ports of entry, the agency certainly has the resources to attend to them in a more humane way. But I'm sure we'll see some photos in a few minutes of these camps. The conditions are so shocking. It's something that I have never seen working in refugee camps around the world, even in detention centers or migrant shelters in Mexico, never seen anything close to the conditions in these camps. So thinking of it from that political perspective makes a lot more sense. So I want to talk a little bit about why it's been so hard to dismantle these camps legally or politically. So as I mentioned, Border Patrol is pushing this right-wing border chaos, Biden's open borders narrative. Again, when we look at the recent border bill that was in Congress, we saw that the Republicans very outwardly said that they didn't want to try to fix the border because they want to run on a border issue, essentially. And what we've seen over the past few years during the Biden administration is that the media has really taken on a lot of these alt-right white nationalist talking points when referring to migrants crossing the border. So whereas during the Trump administration, we saw a lot more support for border aid because people were against family separation or just against a lot of the Trump policies, what we've seen during the Biden administration is Biden has continued or even expanded a lot of the Trump policies that restrict access to asylum, both at and between ports of entry. But all you hear in the media is Biden's open borders, right? So it's like, also, even if they're not saying Biden's open borders, they are talking about chaos. I have now asked, when I get media requests, I am now refusing to participate when they are using a crisis framing because it is very dangerous. When we talk about a crisis, the next sort of logical step from that is invasion. We've seen, right-wing militias coming to the border. Aid workers have been threatened with legal action or violence. So it's really creating an environment where both the migrants and aid workers are at risk. And when we think about that in the context of open air detention, those migrants are really sitting ducks for people who want to cause them harm. And we actually saw this fall a Turkish migrant get his foot run over by someone who was speeding through the camps in Jacumba. So it's really just this overall situation where migrants are being put at risk in a variety of ways because of the US's failure to adhere to its own laws with respect to access to asylum, right? So on the political end, I have seen many in the Democratic Party, as we've seen in this last round of congressional negotiations, really buying into this media narrative. I think a lot of them, want to be tough on the border. They want to give Border Patrol more money. They want to further restrict access to asylum. So again, it's like, and really legalize pushbacks and expulsions, right? Without giving people the opportunity to ask for protection in the United States, which is really a clear violation of the Refugee Convention and the US law that was promulgated once the US ratified the Refugee Convention. But our ability to litigate those violations of law is extremely limited. So in 2022, the Supreme Court issued a decision in a case called Aleman Gonzalez, which basically made it impossible to get injunctive relief for violations of immigration law. So what this means in practice is that the Department of Homeland Security can violate the law with impunity, and the courts cannot force them to follow the law. And so our most recent round of litigation addressing the issue of pushbacks at ports of entry, we filed for a preliminary injunction to force the agency to accept asylum seekers at the port of entry, whether or not they have an appointment through the app. And the judge ruled that the courts basically were not able to issue that injunction based on the Aleman Gonzalez decision. So we are extremely limited in our ability to get any kind of relief through the courts. And DHS's position is basically, we know we're violating the law and we don't care because no one can stop us, right? So that's also a really dangerous position for any US agency to take on. So the other avenues that we've tried are complaints to DHS's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. So as I mentioned, in May, a few groups filed a complaint, and then again in December, We filed a complaint specifically around the open air detention sites. And after my presentation, I'll put a link to that in the chat as well. So what's good about that is that DHS did conduct an investigation. They did come out to the open air detention sites in December. What's difficult about that is, first of all, the Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties is an internal DHS agency. So there's not really like an external check on what the agency is doing. And we have seen in the past that the CRCL's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties has not been particularly effective in creating any kind of accountability. Legally, they cannot force the Department of Homeland Security to do anything. So we filed the complaint. They came and did the investigation. They issued a series of recommendations to the agency, which we have not seen yet. But I've been in touch with the investigators, and then the agency has an opportunity to respond, and then they publish a report. So there's no legally binding mechanism to like force them to give water to refugees or force them to process asylum seekers at ports of entry. It's really just a recommendation. It is helpful for us in subsequent political advocacy, but I just really want to emphasize the fact that a lot of our avenues for legal advocacy have been completely shut off, and the options that remain are really not, they don't have any teeth, right? We've also done a lot of congressional advocacy to try to end the practice of both pushbacks and keeping people in open air detention sites. The issue is that when the Department of Homeland Security was created, it's just an amalgamation of many priorly separate agencies. And so when those agencies were all separate, they all had their own congressional oversight committees. And so at this point, I believe DHS has over 30 committees. I don't remember the exact number, but it's quite a few committees that have some oversight over different components of DHS. And so it's really hard, even through Congress, to get any one agency or any one oversight committee to force the agency to follow the law or to force them to treat migrants humanely. So that's the situation we're in right now. It is very challenging, but I want to just really quickly speak to some of the other kind of misconceptions that we're seeing with respect to asylum seekers who are coming to the border, and how that's still driving this like media and political narrative away from respect for their rights to seek asylum. So one is that's frequently repeated is that people don't show up to court. Migrants, you hear this all the time in the media. Oh, they're not vetted. They're released into the United States. There's no, they don't show up to their court hearings. That is not true. Almost every single migrant, especially asylum seekers, show up to their court hearings. It's almost every single one when they do have an attorney. And I can tell you from my own personal experience working with thousands of asylum seekers that most of the time when they don't show up, it's because they didn't get notice, or they were confused about how to change their address, or they didn't, there's so many reporting requirements and it can be quite confusing. So a lot of times it's just not intentional, right? I would say in my experience with my clients, I can count on one hand those who intentionally did not show up to court. So that's one of them. And then we also hear that people don't have valid asylum claims. They're not real asylum seekers, they're fake claims. That's also not true. Overall, around half of asylum seekers are approved. That really varies on nationality and also the location in which the cases are adjudicated. Chiara's last slide, I think it was one of the last ones that showed the court approval ratings for Turkish people in particular. The amount that were approved for asylum, I think it was like 1,500 out of 2,500 cases that had been adjudicated. And then there's another number that's other relief. So asylum is not the only protection that you can get from being removed from the United States. There's withholding of removal, which is basically allowing you to stay in the United States if you are more likely than not to be persecuted in your home country, but that it's not a path to US citizenship. And then there's Convention Against Torture, which provide some protection for people who will be tortured by their own government. So when we see other relief in those statistics, it includes those other types of relief. And I believe looking at the Turkish example, almost all of the applicants had some form of relief. I believe it was very few who actually received a removal order. And to be clear, when you receive a removal order, you still have two levels of appeal that you can engage in, or three if you want to go to the Supreme Court. But these cases can last for years. And so I think the perception that coming to the United States will at least enable a person to stay for a very long time is correct, right? So I think I will pretty much end there. I just wanted to close by saying that this issue of pushbacks is something that we are seeing around the world. So Australia, pushed back asylum seekers to island detention centers. Europe has engaged in an increasing number of pushbacks at its borders, and of course in the US and Mexico. And so in each of those examples, what we see are large numbers of asylum seekers who are basically trapped on the other side of the border that they're trying to cross, usually in very dangerous conditions. Like when we look at the example of the European Union and Libya, right? Like some asylum seekers are even sold into slavery in Northern Africa. So it's really dire. We have documented well over 10,000 instances of refugees who are waiting in Mexico who've been raped, murdered, assaulted, extorted, kidnapped, trafficked. I mean, the list just goes on and on. And so I wanted to end just saying that because this is a global phenomenon that we're seeing. It affects an incredibly diverse group of people, and it really undermines the basic concepts of the Refugee Convention, which had previously allowed for free movement of people who did fear persecute. I mean, legally it still does, right? Allow for free movement of people who have a well-founded fear of persecution if they were returned to their home countries. So I think that these policies really violate the law in many ways, both domestic and international, and obviously cause a lot of human suffering, as we've witnessed here on the California border. So thank you again for having me. I'm really excited to hear from Nicoló and see some of his photos. So I will turn it over to him.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you both Chiara and Erika for your presentation. Erika, you just touched a very important topic, and which is like the role of the media in the representation of the migration and telling important facts. And actually, that was this year, precisely in May, when I started to wonder whether like as producer of content that then the media use, we were kind of sort of inducing a crisis rather than documenting an ongoing crisis, because of this chaotic situation that was actually created more by the logistics and by the CBP management of the situation rather than of an higher influx of migrants at the border. So I'm gonna share the screen very quickly because I think we run out of time to leave some minutes to Q&A. I'm gonna show you a few pictures that are part of the larger context where these migrations happens. In these photographs, you can see images from the Colombian-Venezuelan border, from Central America, from Mexico and the United States, where in fact, several different flows of migrants from South America, from Africa, from Europe, from Asia, become a sort of one single flow of people. And as you can see, there are images that of people who are born on the move, other people who die on the move, and most of the time in this migration, across the continents, the most aid people get is from volunteers or independent organizations as the one Erika worked for. In this picture, you can see a family from Turkey, which is now living in Jersey. And Chiara and I hope to meet them again soon. This was in Honduras, in Guatemala, sorry. And recently in Jacumba, as you both said, most of the migrants, I mean, the major groups I saw were Chinese migrants who like in this photograph, I try to photograph hiding the identities because they feel persecutions back at home for their families, and Turkish migrants. This is the freight train La Bestia. This is one of the camps in Jacumba. Here we go, Boulevard. All right. Okay, Chiara, I'm more than happy, like to give more details and insight about my work if there are Q&A, but I see the hour is almost getting to an end, so I would leave space to the people here in the room.
Yeah, that's what we wanted to stick to 45 minutes, so already we ran out of 5 minutes, so please, yeah, let's open.
Well, that's okay. I was really enjoying the pictures, the beautiful and poignant pictures here. So maybe we can put them back up. I don't know, at some point, but we definitely can open this up for Q&A. And while the audience starts to think about the questions that they want to ask, I had a question for Chiara on the Turkish migrants, and just wondering, do you know what sources of information they rely on? You had a slide up there that showed that they perceive Europe to be this dangerous fortress. It's in crisis. That seems to me one could say very similar things about the U.S. And so I'm wondering how they primarily get their information about going to the U.S. and conditions there.
Should we collect, or you want me to start answering?
Yeah, why don't you start, and then I see David
Okay.
has come up, so we'll move to David after that.
Okay. So where they get infos, as far as it concerns Europe, I would say that many of them were actually referring to some family and relatives in Europe. I remember one of the migrants I interviewed was, for instance, mentioning that his cousin in Germany went to the university, like master's and BA, MA, and now is unemployed there. So he was saying to me, how do you think I would find a job if my cousin that's, grow up there and now is unemployed in Germany? So that was a kind of, for them, the experience of that family was, of course, telling the entire situation in Europe. But as far as it concerned also the dangerous border, to crossing, for instance, in Europe, that was according to them, was something that they could experience in Turkish newspaper. So the pushbacks that are actually going on between Turkey and Greece, for instance, are also documented, and is something that they were pretty much aware of, the fact that migrants are pushed back to Turkey. Plus, they added that they were saying to me that if the Turkish army, which is kind of patrolling the border, find out some migrants from Afghanistan, Syria, or Pakistan that wants to cross and go to cross the river and attempt to cross to Europe, the Turkish army would probably won't stop them. But if, on the contrary, the Turkish army would find Turkish citizen attempting crossing that border, that would be more difficult for them, and they would have been immediately pushed back in their city of residence, and they were very scared about that too. So there was this perception of the border in the European context as far as it concerned Europe, while on the US side, this optimism and this idea of land of opportunities was again pretty much in discourse. And the information were mostly, I would say, coming from either some networks and families or relatives that were already in the US. Many of them they were mentioning, for instance, that there was someone already waiting for them with a job in New Jersey, or everything was already just waiting for him or her to cross and to reach the family or the friends waiting in the United States. So the most of this information were again coming from I would say previous network or family relatives that were already in the US. Yeah.
Thank you. David, you had your hand up?
Yeah, a couple of questions about the Turkish case. This is extremely interesting. And one of my questions is, are there people who decide to try to leave those camps at Jacumba? And if so, what does the Border Patrol do about it? What are the legal implications of trying to leave those camps if it happens? And the second is, did the migrants from Turkey say anything about their interactions with officials in Mexico? You know, for 40 years, the US has periodically applied pressure on the Mexican government to slap visa restrictions on specific countries with high levels of asylum seeking, for example, or transit migration to the US. Is there any evidence of that kind of thing going on in the background?
I think I can answer the first part of that question. So most of the people who go into these camps do not want to leave because they understand from what Border Patrol is telling them and from those who have come before that their only way to access the asylum system is by staying and waiting for Border Patrol to process them, which isn't exactly true. I mean, they could enter and try to walk off if they wanted to and apply for asylum affirmatively. But just walking out of those camps is logistically almost impossible. One, because there's often Border Patrol stationed in the camps just watching people. And two, each of the camps has an autonomous surveillance tower. So these are AI enhanced surveillance towers, which have audio and visual range of like a few miles, and they will send alerts to Border Patrol whenever there's movement of interest, right? So the AI kind of differentiates between people and animals, for example, and will send alerts to Border Patrol. And there's also surrounding the camps, every time I drive in to Jacumba, I will see at least 5 Border Patrol vehicles, either just sitting by the wall, patrolling the roads, etc. And the towns where the camps are located are very remote, even though it's only like an hour or so from San Diego. You have a mountain range and a desert in between, right? So it's really difficult for people to walk out. Actually, there were 2 Turkish migrants, I think it was in October, who were hungry and thirsty, and they wanted to walk to the store and get cigarettes and food, and Border Patrol picked them up and brought them back into the camps. And we've seen that happen a couple times. When over the Christmas holiday, people were forced to stay for like 6 days at a time, and we saw a mass exodus of around 100 people walking out of the camps, and they were intercepted by a Border Patrol bus who loaded them all up and then brought them to San Diego to be processed. So the legal implications, I don't think, are as serious. I mean, they've already entered without inspection, but you know, physically it's hard to leave. And then if they're at the open air detention sites in San Isidro, they're stuck between 2 30-foot border walls. So again, physically, it's just really difficult for them to to actually leave the camps. And I think the second part of the question, maybe Chiara.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. And there is also, of course, the idea that they can then apply for asylum, which, as you also, Erika, mentioned, so far the data on acceptance are, I mean, not so bad compared, especially also to the last years in Europe. So there is this also idea to apply for asylum. They almost all of them wanted to actually start this process. Therefore, they wait to the CBP to just take them and to the detention centers, and to the identification process could start there. As far as it concerns the Mexico border, the second part of the question also, I would say that they encounter, I mean, when they were mentioning and reporting on the Mexico police, there was this idea that they sometimes, for instance, were reporting about people who actually was then deported. As far as they landed, for instance, in Mexico City or in Cancun, even at the airport, some migrants were saying that not all people, not all of them that were on the plane actually managed to come out from the airport. So there is someone who actually is deported there. But of course, I could not see that. I think that it would be interesting to go also to Cancun and or at least either in the Mexico City airport or the Cancun. But I think Cancun is it's better in that respect, and to see precisely also what we can get from that, if we can have some information also on these people that are actually deported immediately to Turkey, because many of them say that they were very scared when they arrived in Mexico, when they landed in Mexico, because they actually didn't know what could going on. I mean, what could be the end of that first part of the process. But what also they were saying actually is that in that all-inclusive package, let's say, that they bought, there was also the idea that they could be pretty much sure that if their name was on a specific list, that then they could have chance to arrive, let's say, directly to, in Tijuana, and then cross with no problems at all. That was also the idea that there are actually different type of travelers. So there are some migrants that are in some specific lists that are more somehow safe, in the sense that they know that they want to be deported. Some others that, for instance, buy their own tickets from Istanbul to San Diego, no, but to Tijuana, and then they buy the last part from Tijuana to the border. Therefore, it might be some different, let's say, treatment, and some different also, let's say, final the destination can be different also, and the process can be different in Mexico for them. That was stories that were reported, that I keep on listening also from migrants in the camps. So the fact that someone actually was deported was also there. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, hi. I was just hoping to be able to talk with Erika afterwards. I'm a master's student at CSU working on a project in the health administration class, and I was kind of hoping to be able to get your contact information for a little bit of an interview and some other questions. And also in general, this PowerPoint I know, or this presentation I know, was said being recorded. So I was just wondering also how to get a hold of that recording. And also a hold of these photos.
I can put my contact information in the chat.
Okay, cool.
The recording will be made available through our YouTube channel. So if you've registered for this to attend this presentation, you will then get an email, a follow-up email from Warren, making that presentation available. It's on our YouTube channel.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Is there also any way to get these photos linked?
So I will let Nicoló respond to that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you can see the photographs on a Bloomberg publication. There are others on my website, Instagram account, Time Magazine. You can just like type my name and Time Magazine or either Bloomberg, and you will get access to a few articles. And then if you need specific images for your work, you can just reach out to me, and we can see what I can do for you.
Nicoló, could you put your Instagram handle in the chat?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Let's move on. Got a couple hands up. So we have Rosanna Perotti.
Hi, and forgive me for no camera. I teach at Hofstra University in Long Island, and I'm just studying Moroccan immigrants in the United States right now. I am wondering whether there are ethnic organizations that participate in helping out these Turkish immigrants.
Yeah. Shall we collect more, Claire, or shall I keep on one by one?
You can answer,
Yeah.
and then we'll move to Danielle.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions also. And there are some associations. I would say that these migrants were actually, as far as I could see in these interviews, mostly referring to some network of contacts that they previously had from Turkey, and not necessarily to some association and NGOs or organization, any organization that are based in the US. So they were referring mostly on family networks, contacts, and most of them on social media groups and WhatsApp group that actually where they found most of the information they needed to not only to reach the United States, but also to navigate the system. So I remember some of the questions they were asking to me or some other volunteers in the open air detention sites were actually some questions that they got from social media, from a WhatsApp group of other Turkish migrants that already entered in the US or were about to arrive. And so there was a kind of circulation of information in that respect that was mostly on, I would say, on this kind of context than local or ethnic associations, which I know are pretty much there, and they in some, I mean, let's say in big cities, like I remember they were also mentioning, for instance, some association in Chicago. Some migrants that were, they wanted to go to Chicago were mentioning at some point an association, a Turkish association in there. But for the vast majority, it was mostly a network of families and relatives, friends that were already there. So there was not this previous context. It was not so important. I won't say that it was there.
I just will jump in here and say that's not surprising to me, because the ethnic associations would appear to be connected with the government, and they are ultimately going to be trying to file for asylum. So that makes, that's what I would expect. Yeah,
that's another part of the answer for sure. It's important to say that the very fact that I was talking, I mean, with them in Turkish, sometimes what made them suspicious about my my identity and my role in the camps. So I had to say from the very beginning that I was there as part of volunteer groups of the NGOs, that of course, the other volunteers were already there with me. I was not alone most of the time, but still I remember many of them were really suspicious about the fact that I was able to speak Turkish, and why. I mean, that was somehow not so expected. So that's why they were also suspicious about that. So definitely, you're right. That's one of the reasons. Sure. Also, but that's another issue. Is also that there are different groups and different opposition, also member of the oppositions groups are there and are sharing the same camps or sites there. So they also they don't know also who are other Turkish migrants or Kurdish migrants there. So there is solidarity, but at the same time, also they need to know each other, and they start talking a lot also to know and to see to how they represent. I mean, how they represent themselves as opposition members, for instance, in Turkey. So that's also multi-level kind of suspicions, but also, of course, need to present themselves to somehow play with what kind of cards are available in that moment, in that precise moment when they share night and days in that camps. Yeah.
Thank you. Very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from Daniel.
Yes, hello everyone. I hesitated to ask my question because it's somehow forward-looking and speculative, but I ask it nonetheless, and it fits quite well with the video which Nicoló just showed us about Chinese migrants. Because for all I understand, both the Turkish and the Chinese migrants are representative of a fairly new trend, that the countries of origin of people moving across the US-Mexican border has become much more diverse in very recent years. So it's a fairly new development. And for all we know, once a route is established, it can even be reinforcing. So from your conversation with the Turkish asylum seekers, do you have any impression whether this will be a sustaining trend or maybe even reinforced in years to come? And there's maybe even a legal dimension to the question, because for all I understand from US law, and I'm a legal academic, but not an American, as you hear from the accent, the Biden administration has so far, I mean, the policies have very much distinguished between countries of origin. So for Nicaraguans, it's much stricter than for Turkish, one of the reasons why they don't run away from the border guards. So does that complicate from a governmental perspective the way of responding to the situation, that you are confronted with much more diverse countries of origin? That's maybe legal element to it.
Well, I can take this if you guys want, girls.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, the Biden administration has been more strict with some nationalities, but at the same time, the situation, like the migration universe in the country is so chaotic that migrants from Nicaragua can be expelled, or from Guatemala can be expelled 3 times, but the 4th times it goes well for them. So it just it just creates more chaos within Mexico and other countries. But basically, we don't have to forget that the economy, both in Europe, but especially in the US, is really based on the illegal migration. So even with changes of administration, the flow of migrants would be always, will continue, because inequality is not stopping in the countries of origin. Conflicts are more and more violent everywhere. So regarding the first part of your question, it's possible that this wave of new migrants from Asia, from the Middle East, from parts of Europe will increase indeed. But in the same time, the massive flow of migrants from the poorest country of the world towards Europe and the United States it's probably just at the beginning of a massive, era of migrations where the political response of the governments will never be faster than the capability of cartels and human traffickers to adapt to any policy. Plus, there is there's the fact that through the illegal migration, countries like the United States or European countries can mitigate inflation, can mitigate can mitigate the economic crisis, basically, because the people who will be able to enter illegally, they will be working, and everybody I met find work very easily, either in agriculture, either in construction, either in restoration. And I was just speaking with a friend. He's a Venezuelan migrant. I followed him on his way across Mexico, and now with his family in New York. He was hired for a construction work. He did it, and then eventually he wasn't paid. That's extremely valuable for the economy, because if you have people who can work and you can avoid to pay them and nothing's going to happen to you, that of course makes your own economy stronger, and basically this is what's going on. A lot of refugees or asylum seekers or migrants who are living in Jersey or in New York now are given the chance to go and populate more remote areas. From New York, the municipality is paying for 1 year of rent in cities such as Buffalo because they are less populated. So, they're saying, go there, go to those places. And of course, these people will receive, assistance in their asylum claims. But basically, the intention of having migrants in the country is also to repopulating remote areas, having illegal work, and this is benefiting powerful corporations and also the economy in general.
I just wanted to add really quickly, that was extremely insightful. I think we will continue to see a trend of hardening of borders. And what that does is strengthen criminal groups. And so it's not only the fact that these routes are established and then people hear from their friends or relatives who have jobs in the United States and they keep coming. But there's also, because immigration law is so complex, there's really this information vacuum that is filled by organized crime. And so we hear time and time again from the migrants that they were told, this is the legal way to seek asylum, to cross between ports of entry and wait in the camps, or, recruit, like smugglers will recruit migrants with all kinds of promises that may or may not be true. And so I think we will also continue to see that trend of borders hardening, criminal groups becoming stronger, their reach is becoming more global, they're recruiting migrants in their home countries to come to the United States. And some of the smuggling packages, you pay in China, and that includes everything, to the time you get to the camp, including a lawyer if you get caught by Mexican immigration to file an amparo for you in Mexico. So it's those networks are becoming strengthened, and we see that reflected in the security situation, especially on the Mexican side of the border right now, particularly in Baja California, which has become much more dangerous in the past few years. I think basically it's a direct correlation between the increase in border restrictions.
Yeah, it's just following up on what you were saying, it's the structure of the it's not just the human trafficking, it's in general the human mobility is evolving, and the panorama is changing as different nationalities of migrants are getting to the same spot. So in Bogota, for example, you can go to a travel agency and get the Mexican tour for $3,000. And without the $3,000, they make sure that you will reach those places you saw in the photographs where people can actually cross the border. And it's a good business for people, and even for cartels, it's a great business. And that's happening in China as well.
I have a question for Nicoló, just wondering, without giving away all your secrets, if you would share with us how you were able to establish a relationship of trust with the subjects you're documenting and photographing. I mean, these are vulnerable people, and you know, you're capturing them in very vulnerable times. I'm just very curious, how do you do that?
Well, you know, like it's a very crucial moment for their life because it's a transitional moment from a place they know, which is home, and where the condition of their life have become somehow unbearable. So they are living a place they know, and they are going to an unknown destination. But I try to look at that as a transitory condition for them. So, you know, like, of course, we're talking about migrants more in general, and then, you know, more specifically, asylum seekers or refugees. But I try to look at them, you know, like as women, children, men, young fellows, boys or girls, before thinking of them as migrants, you know. And I try to explain that, you know, like, of course, sometimes I don't have that time, you know, to engage in, you know, like in that explanation of the philosophy of my work. But I think it's something that you can share with people just through the looking of the eyes, and with few words, sometimes also without sharing words, you know, like with just non-verbal communication. And then now, you know, like this project, which I called Exodus, is getting to its sixth year of investigation. So this situation, the borders, the people, I'm getting used to them, and it's become easier for me also to communicate with them. And also, you know, like, photography for me is a way to approach all these chaotic situations, the border, the crisis, the vulnerability of these people, and kind of digest it and translate it in a language that can be easy to be understood from everybody, you know. And to do so, I try to look at these people as like the most beautifully I can, you know. So I don't want them. And also I often take a lot of pictures, and sometimes they ask me, "Why are you taking so many pictures?" And I tell them, "Well, because I take so many to make sure that there will be one where you will look beautiful, even though this situation is tough." And people in general understand that, you know. And what's changing a lot is that I was talking about it with Chiara a few days ago. So I guess a few years ago, with a quick look, I could say if a group of migrants were from Honduras or Guatemala or Venezuela. Now that has changed so much because, well, you have people from Africa, you have people from Bangladesh, Kurdish, Turkish, Nepali, and then all the Eurasian countries, you know, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. So even the graphics, like the graphic landscape, you know, like of the people of these migrations are changing, and the visual is changing as well. Sometimes it feels like you are somewhere else in the world, you know.
We can anticipate that after this work, Nicoló will also come to the Turkish-Greek border. So we might also add some visual part of that border as well. So that would be, I mean, not in the near future, let's say, but yeah, we will also add that part. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we have time maybe for one more question if anybody has any. If not, I want to thank our panelists, Chiara, Nicoló, and Erika, for your time and for sharing this fascinating presentation. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I wish everybody a happy, long President's Day weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.